Hello.
Hello, it's me.
It's me, Shannon. Hi, juniors.
And it's time for On and Off the Topic.
Dun, 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 dun. We really like on and off.
Where we have a topic and we are on and off about it.
We are on and off the stage, the improv stage specifically.
Yep.
About it. I have a topic for us because reflection is what's happening in our month. Our monthly theme is reflection. And this is what I want to talk to you about. Ta-da!
Why is it hard to reflect on ourselves? And how does improv help us see ourselves more clearly? Ooh.
Okay, so I like to talk to you about my personal journeys on this show sometimes. So so I've been doing this really cool thing where I take pens. These pens, they're like the fun, colorful pens, and I have a little journal, I guess, full of black paper. Ooh. And I draw. Okay, so I just like draw. So but the drawing looks like this.
Oh, fun!
It's like fat lines and skinny lines and things like that. So today I was talking to an artist and I was like, can we talk about how I can find inspiration? Like, I feel like I've played with this, and I'm done. I like wild lines and wild colors and all of this. And what she said was, she was like, yes, I see that you are saying you like wild lines, but what I actually see is that you like specificity in your lines. Like, they're very clearly marked, clearly defined. What did she say? She said,
yeah, the edges are so smooth.
Yeah, and I really liked it. I was like, no, I doodle it's nuts over here. It's just random. She's like, no, you literally have like circled out like specific patterns. Even where you have like drips of paint, you've sort of made like specificity in the wildness. And she said, I challenge you to do ugly colors and ugly lines. And so I named these two pieces Ugly Colors and Ugly Lines. And this was so difficult for me, Emily.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, this is hideous and I can't handle it. So I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to talk to Emily Arnold about it.
And what an eye-opening experience for you too.
Well, yes, and that's where the reflection comes in, right? Because in my head, I'm like, oh, look at me doodling these wild doodles, but it's really hard to reflect on yourself to really see what it is you're actually doing. You need, and this is, to me, improv really helps with this type of thinking because you're bouncing ideas off of somebody else so that they can reflect, oh, I know you offered this offer, but here's what I'm seeing in that offer. So let's start there, reflecting on self. It's difficult.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, right? Because we have, for physical reflections, we have mirrors,
right.
But imagine if you didn't have like any mirrors or any reflective surfaces, and you would never actually know what you look like, right?
Yeah.
So similarly, if you don't have people around you who you will like, listen to their feedback for,
Mhm.
you don't actually know what you're like, what your things are. You don't actually know how well your offers are received, or
Mhm.
how well that joke that you made at that dinner party went over. If there's no one around to laugh,
Right.
then you don't know if it's funny to other people, you know?
Right. And it's interesting to know that environment plays a really big part, because it's like, yes, people help reflect, but also the environment helps to reflect, like where you are situated, whether that's in a kitchen or in a bathroom, like one doing something, cooking my omelet in the bathroom, not such a great idea, I think. But and doing other things in the kitchen, not such a great idea. The idea being that the environment will help reflect who you are as well. We have not just the people, but also environment helps to not draw, but guide our choices,
Mm,
help us to know, like, okay, how am I supposed to be? What should my offers be in this moment?
mhm. Well, I think there's a lot of, I think kind of what you're talking about environment is you're looking at the consequences that happen after your behavior, right? And whether or not you get a more desirable context and or more desirable consequence in different contexts, right? You might the reason you cook eggs in a kitchen is probably because your stove is a better heat conductor than your shower. And so like if you try to cook your egg in shower steam, right? Um you might get a less desirable result, a less desirable consequence of that behavior. And you can be like, oh, hey, let's not do that one again.
Right.
I bet we can find something better. And that
Hmm.
better thing is probably the stove. And I think that's part of the higher level learning that we as humans are able to do is kind of that
This,
planning.
yes, you're talking about planning. This reminds me of how it shows up on the improv stage, right? Our environment helps us to understand what emotions we should be exuding, how we should be connecting with our fellow improvisers. It's very interesting to scene paint with emotion, right? When we say, hey, in this room, there is a lamp on a table, and with a book, there's a lamp and a book on a table. Great. That's a great scene paint. But if we say there is a lamp, the lampshade is old, it's dusty, there's no bulb, and there's a book, some of the pages are torn out, and it's open to a particular page with lots of underlining, and the table is a three-legged table and it's very wobbly. There's a certain type of feeling that we're exuding. So when we paint like that, I know, at least I've painted this thing, and Emily is going to come in, and maybe Emily's not going to skip around and hop around.
I might, but I do it as a ghost.
I do it as a
I do it as a ghost child.
you see, but there's like particular environmental clues that help us, um, that help us to know how to act, or at least that guide us and inform and inspire. And I'm thinking about this, like, why is it hard to reflect on ourselves? How does improv help see ourselves more clearly? Sometimes it is hard because we're so focused on ourselves that we forget the environment, like
Mhm.
what is going on around me, how for whatever result I want, what might be the best way for me to act or move through this particular situation.
Yeah. And being open and aware of your environment and the way in which your behavior is impacting that environment can allow you to decide, what you're going to do in the future, right? If you are closed off to that kind of environmental feedback, whether it's like, I think we all know those people who don't who think that they're people, but they are not people.
You're not a
Uh,
people person.
and and that's probably because they're a little bit closed off. They have difficulty reading the room, seeing the effect that what they're doing and saying has on other people. Um, and improv trains us to do the opposite of that. Like we have to pay attention to our scene partners, and we have to pay attention to those little things that can affect our behavior, and so that we can get reflected back on us, like how was that taken?
Ooh. And so when this idea, like we need to put things out there so that they can be reflected back on us. The other part that you're talking about is this openness, right? When I'm talking or when I'm thinking about all of these nutto potatoes squiggles that I'm doing, I I really have an idea, and this also is about the stage. I really had an idea of how whimsical I was being, right? I am being so whimsical right now. Look how whimsical I'm being. and for somebody to say, yeah, I see your whimsy, but there's whimsy in structure. And for me, I felt like, oh, I have to be open to this feedback in order to create another story. And yeah, the in real time on stage, I feel like that looks like I put out a dusty lamp, I put out that dusty book, and I'm sitting there really thinking that there's an old lady in a rocking chair, but you come out as your spirited ghost, right? Like child ghost. I'm like, oh my god, child ghost. But
That
that
wasn't what I wanted.
exactly.
or
Exactly.
or come in like as like the demo team to break down.
Right.
Like you thought you were getting like some like creepy old lady in this little house. Nay. You were
Nay.
getting the
We're getting
story of
out
the
there, getting a
demolition
whole
team who's
construction
breaking
team.
down this abandoned home.
Which is great. And that idea, like it is hard to reflect. It is hard to reflect upon ourselves because we think we're putting something very clear out into the world, right? This is obviously a ghost story. We are obviously doing Dickens. Like, come on. And then for someone to come in like, yeah, it's the demolition team. It's time to get rid of this thing. Like it is, we don't know 100% the story that we are delivering and how that is being brought upon us. But the other side of this, how does improv help us? How does improv help us see ourselves more clearly? Is the practice that we get. Okay, I put all that stuff out. What else could I have done to be more clear if I really, really wanted to force my partner into a Dickens story? What else could I have done? These are some, we're just talking. We're just how improv helps us see ourselves more clearly. It definitely gives us the practice of putting ourselves out there, receiving feedback. Oh, what feedback did I get? Was it the feedback I thought? What else can I put out to narrow in on the feedback that I want?
And there's also the question of what do you want to do with that feedback? Is that feedback like, you come in with a construction team or demolition team? Are you then going to be like, no, that's actually very funny. Let's ride that train.
Exactly.
Or are you going to be like, are you going to come back and be like, I'm the ghost that's haunting this demo team?
Exactly.
Where are you going to take
The story,
yeah.
right? Let's see.
Gus Davis asks, does being endowed as a character, as an improviser, make you reflect upon yourself? Or do you usually hold to your own vision? Asking for a spirited ghost friend.
What a fun question. Does being endowed as a character, as an improviser, make you reflect upon yourself, or do you usually hold to your own vision? It's so. This is what a perplexing place to be, right? Why is it hard to reflect upon ourselves? How does improv help us see ourselves more clearly? When you're endowed as a character, it's hard. I have a couple of choices here. I'm endowed as a doctor. I'm endowed as a mother. I'm endowed as a brother. I'm endowed as whatever. I can either say, absolutely not. I don't want to be endowed as that thing. I can do that. But the fun part is for me as an improviser is reflecting on how I, Shannon, the improviser person, can come through the character that I've been endowed.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also combining your vision with what you were endowed with, right? I I always think about in Jill Bernard's little improv book, I think she has this example of the Peter Lorre housewife, where she wanted to start a scene as like this like Igor kind of like hunched over like scientist character, and then her scene partner came on and was like, "Oh, hello, honey," and rather than dropping any of that, bind the two. So now,
right?
this little character that's like, "Oh yes, oh I'm making beans tonight,"
And making
whatever. So I think there's a place for both holding your own, not abandoning what you had, but also accepting, being open to what your partner's endowing you as.
Absolutely. Yeah, and there is a practice in that as well, right? As far as accepting, I'm trying to think of ways that shows up in the real world, right? When we are, I mean, you know nothing about this, I'm sure, but when we are mothers or caretakers, right? But we also have been endowed to be the household workers, as far as being in the job force, or just, I mean, anything, cleaners, so like therapists, what other things, like how do we hold being a parent and being a fill in the blank? How do we hold being a child and a sister? How do we hold being, a friend and there's a word I'm looking for, a person who delivers consequences. But you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
we have many dichotomies. We have many things, many ways. And I think that we see ourselves, and this is going back to this, why is it hard to reflect on ourselves sometimes? Like, what part are we trying to reflect on, right? It's when we think of ourselves as whole people, sometimes that can get really messy when we're really trying to see, well, what kind of sister am I? But I'm also being all these other things. So do I ignore those other things, or do I tally them up within this one thing? So scary.
Well, I think there's a way to lump together those things across contexts. And I think the way we do it is my favorite V word, your values. Because when you're thinking about like, what kind of sister am I, or what kind of parent am I, what kind of employee or manager, or blah, 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 and when we're thinking about those different roles that we play, we can also think about like the values that we hold in those
Mm-hmm.
different roles. And my guess is honestly, they're probably not too dissimilar, right? Um, at work, I value being supportive and being
Mm-hmm.
empathetic, which are the same values that I bring to my life at home, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and so when I have to make decisions, even when those roles are in conflict, I kind of have to, I sometimes think like, okay, what's going to be the most supportive thing I can do right now for people I care about? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I love this, even when those roles are in conflict. I'm trying
mhm,
to think of when we see that on stage, it usually is the role of the improviser themselves and the role of the character.
mm,
And sometimes those things can be in conflict. And I think an example might be something like, an example might be, I am today as an improviser, I am going to stand up for myself. Like I'm going to speak up, right? Or I'm going to get on stage first. I'm really going to stand up, speak up, show up for myself. And then we have you just, that's the thing that you thought, but it just so happens on that very same day, a brand new improviser is playing with you.
uh-huh.
And maybe they need some extra support. Maybe they need to be the first person on stage. Maybe they need something, who knows. And how do you, and do you, how do you lessen what it is that you want in order to support that person? Or even if it's not a person, maybe it's, I'm going to be the person who stands up for myself today as an improviser. And then you're endowed as a super tiny little bug,
Yeah.
a shy bug.
Yeah. I think that's a pretty common, that sort of thing I think is pretty common where
Mhm.
we're like, do we lean into the character of whatever we've been endowed with or whatever situation we find ourselves in? How do we do that without compromising what's important to us, what we value as an improviser? And it could be in that moment and you're seen as a little bug, because probably if you're a good improviser, it's not like I want to stand up for myself and that is the only thing I care about in improvisation. You probably also care about supporting your teammates. So
Yes.
it could be in that moment that you're like, you know what, I will stand up for myself in the next scene. Or
Hmm.
you could make the choice to be like, I'm a loud bug, and do something within your scene to flip the script a little bit and make your character a little bit more unexpected, uh,
Exactly.
unexpectedly higher status than you would have thought.
Right. Yeah. And in doing so, you are still doing the thing that you are saying, Emily, which is one, supporting your values, and two, supporting the what is needed in the scene, what is needed in the show, what the audience needs, what your partners need. And this sort of goes back to, we talk about this a lot too, because this is what we talk about. But we talk a lot about supporting yourself, the yes and, not being like, yes, I'm going to do it. Anyway, but rather yes anding yourself and your own needs. And it is okay to stand up for your values. It's okay to show up for yourself. Uh, period, the end. And
Yeah.
I'm like in my head, like, okay, but why is it hard to reflect on ourselves? We've listed lots of reasons. And how does improv help see ourselves more clearly? Really, it's the practice. It's always going to be the
It's
practice,
always
right?
going to be the practice. And it's I think in particular, the practice of being open and accepting the feedback, um, and seeing how what you're doing is affecting everything. And so in that way, it's like a metaphorical reflection, like um, you're seeing your behavior or your actions either through the eyes of someone else because you're trusting what they're saying to you, or through the consequences of your actions.
Yeah.
In the same way that if you look at a mirror, you don't actually see yourself, you see the reflection of yourself, right?
Ooh. Listen to Emily Arnold.
Right now, I don't see myself, I see the image of myself as captured from a camera, right? So similarly, when I'm getting feedback about my personality, like things that are my behavior, things that are non-standard, I'm not necessarily seeing the behavior itself, but I'm seeing the reaction to that behavior, the consequences of that behavior.
And we have the consequences of that behavior reflected on the outside world. We've been talking a lot about the environment, how what we do, how the way we see ourselves, the way we hold ourselves, the energy, whatever the character that we are putting out into the world is affecting the environment. But hard to reflect on ourselves is sometimes that's not there. And we talked about this in the beginning. So sometimes we're not looking at the environment, we're looking at other people, but sometimes somehow, some way we're moving through a vacuum, however that is, like where if we've moved and we have no friends, right? We haven't built up our community yet. Okay, well, what do I do to build up that community? What does this environment, what do these people need that the environment I moved from didn't need? Or when your situation changes, if you were without children before and then you are with children.
Right? There's a little change.
A little tiny
The smallest of changes that is upended my entire life, you know.
But this, like, at first, I'm sure that, well, and I bet it's constant, and I know it's constant. I have a son, and it's a constant look. Okay, well, is this working? Is it working? Is it working for that person? Is it working for the environment that we are still in? But going back to what you said earlier, really, is it working for my values? Do I feel good about the choices that I'm making? Do I?
Yeah, and so then that's the other part of reflection is identifying what's going on in here and in here, right? What's going on the inside. I think you're right. That do I feel good about that? Do I reflect on that in a positive way, or does that make me feel sort of icky? Super behavioral terms here, like sort of icky. But
sort
like
of icky is a behavioral term.
I'm gonna lose my certification. But like how when you're seeing the consequence of your action, right? Does it I don't know, does it do whatever it does, whatever chemicals spark in your brain to make things happen when you're happy or not happy, you know? And then knowing how that feels on the inside is super important. Super important and super difficult for a lot of people.
Yes, it is. And the thing is that, yeah, improv is going to help you practice that. We get you've said that there's a term that you use, but the idea that the feedback is quick and it's positive. What is the term? There's a term that
I usually say some things like immediate and constructive.
Yeah.
I feel I try to avoid saying like your feedback should always be positive for obvious reasons, because then it doesn't necessarily help you grow.
Well,
but
in improv specifically, we get that like reinforced this very quick.
Oh yes. Oh, sorry. The dense dense schedule of social reinforcement. Yes.
Easy. I knew there was one. But this idea in the practice of how does improv help us see ourselves more clearly, we do get this very quick feedback like, okay, I'm trying something. Ooh, it worked like this. How do I feel? Like you were saying, Emily, how do I feel up here and in here? I don't like that. We'll try this. Oh, I didn't like that either. Oh, we'll try this. Oh, I sort of like that. Okay, now we're quickly adjusting to get more laughter, more being on the same page with our partners, more character work, body work. Ah, I didn't even see the time, Emily. I saw your face before I saw the time. I was like, what's that face? It's the time face.
It's the time. It's the time face. Listen,
Yes.
7 months ago, I lost all capability of being able to focus for more than 30 minutes. So
It's good.
it came out with the baby. Like,
Bye focus. Bye. It's fine. This is the thing. Go do an improv show. Go to an improv
go
show.
do an improv.
Go do an improv, look around, see how what you're doing is affecting the world, so you can reflect on yourself on and
Off the stage. Goodbye.
bye, everybody.